Hello, this is a presentation for BA 460 International Business. In this presentation, my group members and I will be discussing the background of Egypt, its religion and culture, political, legal, and economic systems, as well as other factors to consider when deliberating whether expansion into Egypt is a sound idea for your company. Without further ado, I will turn the stage over to my partners.
So the religion and culture of Egypt are predominantly Sunni Muslim and Coptic Christianity. So of the population, which is 65 million people, 67 million people, 90% are Sunni Muslims, 8% are Coptic Christian, and the remaining 2% are Jewish or some other Christian denomination. Now, ancient Egypt is known to be ruled by pharaohs and kings of the past. The ancient Egyptians used hieroglyphics as a way to communicate and store records of their rulings of the pharaohs, of some of their political laws, and also to document major happenings that occurred under a certain pharaoh or king's rule. The Egyptian religion was comprised of a system of beliefs, rituals, science, medicines, mythology, spiritualism that continue to play out in everyday Egyptian life as it does today. There's three subcultures within Egypt, and those consist of the modern culture or Western culture, the neutral culture, which is the in between, and the traditionalist culture. So the westernized culture, they adopt different religions, they speak multiple languages, and they're just more aware of the foreign countries and the influences that they have had on Egypt and their ways of life as well. They're more prone to adopt the Americanized or westernized state of politics and fashion and other industries, while the neutral subculture adopts the traditional aspects, which have to do with the Egyptian religion, which is Sunni Muslim, or just living out their lives based on the religious practices and rituals and customs, as well as adopting some forms of westernization as well. So the neutral group is somewhat in between. They're modernized and also traditionalist. But the traditionalist culture is strictly traditional. They stick to the orthodox side of things when it comes to everyday life. They incorporate religion into all of their everyday practices, and they don't adopt any westernized influence at all. One of these practices occur on Friday, which is in observance of a Muslim holiday. That's the day of prayer. So there'll be multiple businesses that close down on Fridays to observe that because majority of the Egyptians are Muslim, so they take the Friday off to pray. Other cultural influences were derived after a couple wars occurred in the past, one being the Sea of People that consisted of a confederation of cities and towns along the Mediterranean Sea and regions of Palestine. Now, after this occurred, many Egyptians, the Ramses III was actually defeated, and so captives came in from the Mediterranean. They were put into the army and also worked as slaves. So that intertwined different culture and different ethnicities within the Egyptian population. The second major war that occurred that caused a change or shift in the religion and culture of Egypt was the fall of Alexander the Great, which also followed the fall of Cleopatra, who was ruler of Egypt at that time. And this ended the Ptolemaic dynasty following her death, as Egypt became under Roman Catholic rule and Christianity became a predominant or enforced religion upon the Egyptian people as opposed to Muslim. So this really shifted the culture and in terms of religion and introduced new wave of ideas and customs and practices, as well as languages. The Egyptians have, over time, adopted different languages as they have become more diverse. Some of those languages were Italian, Greek, and English. So they've adopted those languages into their dictionaries to help, with different dialects and also improve their intellect with the growing diversity of their population. Within the Egyptian culture, it is practiced that in everyday life, the religious values are pertinent in everyday rituals and practices and days of lives. Certain religious holidays remain a forefront to business. So certain businesses will close not only for Ramadan, but also for Easter, in observance of Muslim and Christian cultures. So in Egypt, religion and culture are very big and valued within this country.
Since before the pyramids were built in 2500 BC, Egypt's political system has been a monarchy, with kings ruling the land by claiming the gods spoke through them. This resulted in fear and a lack of resistance from the people. In 1952, the age-old monarchy ended in a coup, resulting in the appointment of the first president and creating the Republic of Egypt. The 1952 coup d'etat, or July 23 revolution, was led by Gamal Abdel Nasser and General Muhammad Naguib of the Free Officers Movement against the ruler at the time, King Farouk. With the success of the coup, the Republic of Egypt was created, thus ending the British occupation and paving the way for a socialist democratic state, in which it claims to operate to this very day. The current president, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, was officially elected in 2014 with 96% of the votes, and again re-elected this year with a resounding 97% of the votes. This landslide strongly suggests that any opposing candidates were somehow ousted from the race, either through verbal or physical coercion, which is a cause for concern. Democracy depends on the voice of the people, and this does not appear to be the case under Sisi's presidency. He's eliminating all that stands in his way of complete power in order to further his agenda despite its impact on the public. Sisi is currently focusing on dealing with the backlash of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates investments that he made during his first term that increased the gap between high and low income households within the country. He is also working on improving the Suez Canal, economic policy, and tourism. These improvements will greatly boost domestic business as trade will be much more efficient. Sales taxes and customs duties have already been decreased. However, corporate income taxes were also increased, which obviously has the opposite effect on business operations. Foreigners that consider conducting business with Egypt will certainly want to consider President Sisi's authoritarian rule and the uncertainty of the nation with regards to civil unrest. It will be necessary to work directly with government officials and know that if their home culture and politics are in opposition to that of Egypt, that they may not be able to conduct business despite their wishes to do so. They may need to offer monetary bribes, which would be against the law in countries such as the United States. Foreign companies are not able to purchase property for business purposes, and trading remains a slow and burdensome process that involves complicated forms and multiple approvals. The Sinai Peninsula conflicts are currently dominating the governmental focus, which leaves the underlying issues of growing population, education, and inflation to continue to wreak havoc. This impacts foreign businesses as they will not be able to hire skilled workers and afford basic necessities such as fuel and electricity. Currently, the government is working towards a sustainable energy program. However, this is still a high cost, which must be considered before conducting business in the country. War is also a constant worry in this area, and while the government appears to be trying to stabilize political unrest and provide opportunities to domestic and foreign business, the overall insecurity of the country remains a valid concern. Let's move on to the legal system of Egypt. The country currently operates under civil law, largely falling under Napoleonic Code. Islamic law, or Sharia, was officially abolished in 1956. However, it still permeates into the decisions made regarding personal legal matters such as marriage. The Constitution, most recently updated in 2014, created an independent judiciary system that drives the legal codes to this day regarding supreme law. Transactional law is determined by the Egyptian Civil Code, or the ECC, and the courts handle all of the civil, commercial, and criminal matters following a strict written code. There is no room for interpretation, which means that the legal system can be swift and stringent with respect to applying the principles to cases. Recent changes to business reform have impacted domestic firms both positively and negatively. Registering property remains a difficult process and can most recently be found to be even more costly, which impacts new business owners and entrepreneurs. On the other hand, minority investors are now experiencing increased protection as they are now afforded more rights and can play a larger role in corporate decisions. This is an important indication that the law is in support of transactional transparency, shareholder rights, and holding those liable for self-dealing. Historically, the Republic of Egypt has not been strong in this area. Other legal barriers include obtaining credit and contracting. Borrowers are not protected by the legal code, so getting credit to finance a business is a significant risk. The contract negotiation and dispute process is exceptionally slow as well, and the lack of an electronic system to file paperwork and pay fees does not help. Foreign companies looking to conduct business in Egypt should make note of all of these issues. They need to be prepared to deal with resistance against female business owners, as well as the inability to own land and import goods to the country in an efficient manner. Countries that operate under common law, such as the United States, will need to make sure they are completely up to speed on what is and what is not legally allowable.
Hey guys, my name is John Ferrer and I'll be giving a quick rundown of Egypt's economic system. First, I'll talk about its history. So, the Egyptian economy passed through a number of stages since 1952. The first stage started from 1952 up until 1960 and was characterized by economic policies and moved towards redistribution of resources through the state's obvious intervention in economic activity. The second stage, which is called the comprehensive planning stage, started in 1960 to 1966. The most distinguished features of this stage are the national comprehensive economic planning and the social application. This stage achieved a growth rate of 38% through the 5-year plan. The third stage, also known as the war economy stage, started when the country's economy suffered the problem of funding the plan. Policies served the preparation to liberate the occupied Egyptian territories. The fourth phase started in 1974, when Egypt's economy changed to open-door economic policy. The most distinguished aspects of this stage are the replacement of the comprehensive planning system by annual programs and making use of Arab and foreign capital and development. Today, the economy of Egypt is moving towards a market-oriented approach after years as a planned economy with import substitution. The country has opened its economy to foreign and private investment. Egypt is a recipient of vast amounts of military and financial aid. The military remains both the country's main social and primary economic force. Egypt's economic structure is well developed and diversified among African and Middle Eastern countries. It has a large industry sector, an essential primary sector, and a fast-evolving service sector. As a market-oriented economy, Egypt is implementing structural reforms encouraging foreign direct investment and allowing supply and demand to dictate the distribution and pricing of goods. The government continues to hold some state-owned organizations such as banks. Despite all the growth, Egypt has some problems as well as some implications. One of Egypt's main drivers of instability over the coming decades is population growth. The UN estimates that by 2050, Egypt's population will reach 150 million, and by 2100, a staggering 200 million. Government planning policies have not succeeded in significantly curbing population growth. Population growth, coupled with overextended education system, has meant that the Egyptian youth are increasingly unprepared and unable to enter the job market. As the population continues to grow, Egyptian urban centers will struggle to provide services such as housing, sanitation, healthcare, and education. Meanwhile, the effects of climate change, higher temperatures, changes in rain patterns, higher sea levels, and potential increases in catastrophic weather events create significant threats to the community. To alleviate the adverse effects of economic reforms on the poor and vulnerable and increased investments in Egypt's human capital, the government has scaled up key social protection short-term mitigating measures. This includes higher allocation of food, smart cards, and targeted conditions and unconditional cash transfer programs. To effectively integrate human development and social protection measures, the conditionality of cash transfer programs is related to health and education. The country's social protection measures are shifting from generalized energy and food subsidies to more poverty and human development targeted programs. Egypt affects other countries in many ways, such as tourism and trade. The economy of Egypt was a highly centralized planned economy focused on import substitution under President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Trade is probably their biggest impact on a global scale. Egypt is the 59th largest export economy in the world. In 2016, Egypt exported $27.7 billion in goods, so it impacts other countries with its participation in trade. So trade is important to Egypt's economy. The combined value of exports and imports equal to 30% of its GDP. Egypt also supplies other countries with various exports, which impacts the supply chain of these products. Egypt's main top exports are petroleum, gold, wheat, and semi-finished iron. Tourism also has its effects on other countries as well. Tourism has historically accounted for about 30% of Egypt's economy and corresponding amount of employment. The positive impact of tourism can be increased through enhancing employment opportunities for people and communities near antiquities sites. Local economies can benefit from tourism demands for local goods and services and the development of more opportunities for local businesses. After the 2011 political transition, the number of tourists visiting Egypt dropped, and the sector's slow recovery has created conditional strain on its already struggling economy at that time. USAID financed restoration and training programs help to ensure that, as the tourism industry recovers, Egypt can capitalize on the sector's traditional roles as an engine of economic growth and development, which it has been doing recently. Overall, Egypt has been doing pretty well, especially when compared to African and Middle Eastern countries as a whole. In 2018, the economy has made good progress so far in its fiscal year. In August, operating conditions in non-oil private sectors for the second consecutive months has improved, and at a faster pace than in July. This was due to increased new business inflows from domestic and foreign sources. Moreover, output stabilized following contractions in recent months. Its future economic growth is expected to remain robust. Increased government investing spending and an improved regulatory environment, a weaker pound, and construction activity related to building of the new capital city should boost activity as well.
So Egypt has an industry with 4 leading business industries that the country partakes in, one being renewable energy, others solar power, and natural resources, and also tourism. The gross domestic product of the country is $1.198 trillion, and the gross domestic product per capita is $11,850. The annual exports for the country are valued at $20.88 billion, with annual imports valuing $57.91 billion for the year 2017. Export commodities consist of petroleum products, crude oil, textiles, chemicals, and fine gems and natural stones. The leading industry in Egypt being agriculture, energy, and tourism as well, but agriculture has had to take a back seat as the country is making strides to gather foreign direct investments towards an irrigation system. China is actually looking to invest in this project in which they can design and engineer waterways for the country in order to boost their agriculture productivity. Also, because Egypt suffers from desertification, they have not been able to meet the demands that the country has in terms of foodstuffs. So of these wheat, rice, and corn that is grown, there is not enough to provide for the demand of the country per capita. So they've had to rely heavily on imports from other countries in order to meet this demand. Egypt recordedly had a production of 8.3 million tons of wheat against a demand of 19.6 million tons in the year 2015 alone. So, and that's because, again, water scarcity threatens the future production of agriculture. In terms of natural resources and energy, Egypt currently has the world's largest solar park, which is a $3.5 billion project, and it has a total capacity of producing 1.8 gigawatts of power production. There's also 3 other solar or hydroparks or dams that are built along the Nile River and the Aswan High Dam. And this is to also provide electricity through hydropower electricity stations. Some of the country with these leading stations is producing up to 2,100 megawatts of electricity. Egypt is also venturing into establishing a $1.5 billion nuclear plant in El Dabasa. So energy and renewable energy, as well as oil exploration, are the leading industries within Egypt. Tourism, on the other hand, accounts for 11% of the country's gross domestic product and also employs 12% of the country's labor force. So tourism in the country has taken a hit because in 2011 there was some political uprising and disagreements as to who the ruler was at the time, and all that political confusion caused some terrorist attacks to happen, and a lot of foreign tourism within the country declined because of that. But since this year, in 2018 alone, there has been an increase of 80% within the tourism industry. But like as before, there's in 2010, 14.7 million visitors toured Egypt in that year alone, and that brought in $12.5 billion in revenue. So because of this hit, tourism was a main booming industry within the country, but because that had to take a hit, we've had to see some growth within that. As for foreign direct investments, Italy currently is the biggest foreign direct investor in Egypt. They currently invested a $4 billion project within the country to establish roadways and trailways and for trains, for transportation efforts, as well as within their renewable energy markets. The Italian government has also developed a plan to provide waterworks within the country to help supply water and assist in their irrigation problem in terms of helping the country sustain their own agriculture so that they don't have to rely so heavily on imports alone. Currently, Egypt ranks 94th place on the Global Competitiveness Index, and they occupy the 24th position in the Global Competitive Index for market size. So Egypt is a developing country. They do have some promise and great potential within the industries that they focus on in terms of what their natural resources are and their competitive advantage, being in a desert and having vast amounts of wind to help with their wind power, and also vast amounts of sun. They can establish these large solar plants and explore those options as well. So Egypt is growing, as well as their industries and foreign direct investments.
My name is Austin Billieu, and I will be discussing advertising in Egypt. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is holidays. So advertising and marketing a product in another country always presents unique challenges. When marketing, you must not only consider the aspects that will make your product appealing to customers, but you must ensure your marketing campaign follows all governmental regulations. Egypt has a culture that is vastly different from Western culture here in the United States. With predominantly different religions, holidays, and traditional family values, it's highly unlikely that a current marketing campaign in the United States is simply going to transfer to Egypt. It's important to be aware of major public holidays and effectively design your ad campaigns accordingly. So I'd like to talk about a few big holidays that are in Egypt. So the first is Sinai Liberation Day. This is on April 25th. So Sinai Liberation Day is it commemorates the final withdrawal of Israeli troops on this date in 1982, and this returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. Next, we have Workers' Day. This is meant to be a celebration of workers and their rights, much like Labor Day here in the United States, and that's celebrated on the 1st of May. Next, we have Armed Forces Day, or Victory Day, 1973. This happens on the 6th of October. It celebrates that day in 1973 when combined Egyptian and Syrian military forces launched a surprise attack on Israel and crossed into the Sinai Peninsula. Then we had Eid al-Adha and El Fitr. In the Islamic lunar calendar, these technically fall on the same day every year, but if we follow the Gregorian calendar, which is what most of the world uses, it's a solar calendar. So now in our calendar, this date varies about 11 days. It's 11 days sooner every year. And these are around the month of Ramadan. And Ramadan is the most sacred month of the year in Islamic culture. This holiday is very personal and individualistic, and it's a time for sacrifice and renunciation, as well as a period of reflection and spiritual growth. This is a time when Muslims from all over the world come together, fasting and renewing family and friend relationships. And so this also changes a little bit with the Gregorian calendar versus the Islamic calendar. So in the Islamic calendar, it's celebrated on the 9th month, and this causes a little bit a variance even in community to community, because the 9th month starts when they actually see the moon. So in some communities, if they don't actually see the moon for several days, it might be a couple days off. Their Ramadan might start a couple days sooner or a couple days later, and this causes a little bit, not confusion quite so much, but you just need to be aware of that. If you're going to advertise in a specific region, be sure that you're aware of when these holidays are actually going to start. So the next bit we're going to talk about is how the values and regulations, how they affect advertising in Egypt. And we discussed that Egypt is a largely collectivistic society, which puts the needs of the community typically over one's personal needs or desires. And we discussed this a little bit earlier in the cultural section of our presentation, but the following is going to give some real-world examples of these values in action. So first of all, the Supreme Media Regulatory Council oversees all commercials, ads, and other media that is shown to the public, much like the FCC here in the United States. They're in charge of censoring and even banning media that is deemed inappropriate. So the first commercial that I'd like to talk about is Vodafone. And so they've had some success over there in Egypt. It's a large phone company. And they've had one very successful commercial in which it focused on the Ramadan spirit. And I did watch these videos, but it was hard to find a good translation. And so, from best what I could tell, it was a very feel good advertisement that focused on all these values in the community and everything like that. And obviously it was for their Vodafone product. And then on the other end of that, they just recently had a commercial where they have a little puppet that's kind of their mascot. And this commercial was recently given some backlash because, according to the Supreme Media Regulatory Council, it contained utterances and scenes that did not comply with public values, promoted inappropriate behavior, threatened public decency, and contained crass language. And I watched this commercial as well. And it was interesting to watch because this is something that absolutely would have been okay here in the United States. From everything that I saw, I obviously couldn't get the language barrier held me back there, but there was just this puppet, and at one point it was taking a bath and scrubbing its back, and it didn't have a top on, but it was a puppet. It didn't have any gender. It was gender neutral, but it was shut down by the Supreme Media Regulatory Council. And I looked a little bit further into it, and Vodafone was even taken by surprise in their statement, saying that they weren't given any notice, that it was that they were disappointed that it was taken down, and they were striving to get it corrected because they would like to stay with these traditional values. And so next we have Etisalat's commercial, and this is another phone company, and in this one there's what looked like a kind of a grandfather on his deathbed, and the family's all gathered around, and the grandson, he's kneeling down, he's talking to him, and he's a kid in his probably mid-20s, early 20s, and he leans over and he's having this deep conversation with his grandfather, and then he swings in the promotion for the commercial, essentially, their package that they were promoting, and he asks his grandfather, essentially, if he can get these rollover minutes since he's passing away, and everybody stops, and they look at each other, and his grandfather slaps him. And this was banned because it promoted domestic violence. And it was a funny commercial. I thought it was a funny commercial, but it goes to show that something that would fly here in the United States would absolutely not in Egypt. And next, I'd like to discuss Cotton Hills. It's a boxer commercial. And this featured a popular actor named Hani Ramsey. And he was just dancing and showing off his Cotton Hill boxers with a whole streak of other men, and they were just doing this line dance, doing this jig, and it wasn't sexual in nature or anything like that, as far as I could tell. They were just dancing and enjoying the comfort and style that came with these boxers. But this was another commercial that was banned due to its suggestive themes. And so these are pointing out reasons why it's important to include on your local marketing team someone who has experience in the Egyptian culture, and you need to test your ad on small groups. That way you can avoid a negative perception of your products. There's also a variety of marketing agencies in Egypt, such as Media and More, Hive Advertising Agency, and Connect Ads, which work with businesses to achieve quality and effective ads in the market. In conclusion, we'd like to say that conducting business in any foreign country is complex. Egypt's political unrest and close proximity to war leave it in an unstable environment that's not ideal for investors. Correctly catering to the government as well as marketing regulatory councils could potentially prove challenging, considering the strict religious values and traditions that Egyptians adhere to. These values and traditions continue to be a driving factor in many political policies, and one must thoroughly examine their company to ensure that they fit within the community. Future changes to Egypt's economic policy and government could open new and lucrative business options, especially with the growing westernization and acceptance of outside beliefs that the new generation is showing. With these thoughts in mind, it is our conclusion that overall, Egypt is not the ideal place to conduct a new business adventure.